tonight, we've got an exclusive interview with the ASEAN Secretary-General, who says we have to manage our relationship with Beijing. His veiled warning in a moment. This is his only television interview coming up. Also tonight, I'll speak exclusively with the Israeli doctor who was at first invited to speak at a medical conference here in Australia. But after flying all the way here from Israel, he was shamefully subjected to a boycott, and the organisers claimed they cancelled his talk for his own safety. This is a farce. He's going to join me live in an exclusive interview, having just stepped off a plane back in Israel. Also, the leak of British and French military secrets. Liz Storer and Joe Hildebrand will be on in a moment. But first tonight, we have uncovered footage, as I mentioned, that reveals members of a pro-Palestinian activist group claiming to be terrorists, and they say that acts of terror are ethically justified. The group, camped out in the heart of Melbourne CBD, also warned that while they're already dubbed terrorists, their proper resistance hasn't even started yet. And Victorian police say they're unaware of this chilling video footage. When we contacted them today about it, they now say that they've got analysts in the counter-terrorism unit looking at it. They said they've got no current investigations into the protesters who call themselves Sit Intifada. This means that these terrorist sympathisers have been flying under the radar of authorities, despite already being involved in several violent attacks and getting a lot of publicity. Our Sky News investigation has also uncovered that a member of their group has already been allegedly involved in a separate, serious criminal offence, which we can't discuss for legal reasons. Yet you've got this lacklustre police effort that's failed to make this connection before being alerted to it just a few days ago. Had these protesters been properly monitored, perhaps the separate alleged criminal offence could have been avoided. Well, the Victorian police are looking very flat-footed. They're now scrambling after we uncovered these terrifying warnings made by these protesters online.
They label us as terrorists. A chant. We haven't even started the proper resistance action yet. We will. It's just a matter of time. There is no doubt about it, because I have faith. I have full faith on my Creator and my land that this resistance will start.
Now, we had to blur the whole of that man there because of the other criminal case that I mentioned, but he had that stark warning, it's just a matter of time. He says they label us terrorists, but we haven't even started the proper action yet. It's chilling. And then here's Kieran Stewart Asherton, the president of the so-called Black People's Union, also describing himself as a terrorist. If he's being honest, he says, have a listen.
At the end of the day, of course, the colonial entities are going to call us terrorists. And, at the end of the day, to them, we might be terrorists. At the end of the day, if we're being honest, we are. Because we're terrorising the colonial systems. But the colonial systems shouldn't be here in the first place. They shouldn't be in Palestine in the first place. They shouldn't be anywhere in the world in the first place.
Oh, if we're being he says with a shrug. And then listen to this. He then doubles down and says that any terror attack is justified.
We have every right to become terrorists of these colonial occupations because they've spent how many decades now terrorising our people and occupying our land. Any sort of, terrorism that we might commit is justified resistance. It's legally justified under international law, and it's justified morally, and it's justified ethically. Because at the end of the day, what is happening to us is more egregious and more disgusting, more harmful than anything that we could ever do.
I mean, why aren't Victorian police monitoring this stuff? And then just 8 days after he posted that video, he then said that rallies and protests aren't enough, that even more severe action needs to be taken.
We need to think bigger. Electoral systems and petitions and trying to appeal to people's goodwill do absolutely jack shit. We can't sit back and watch as our land is stolen from us to be used to ethnically cleanse other people. We need to start taking more solid material action. Not solidarity coming and standing out at rallies, not solidarity signing petitions. Actual material action that stops the flow of weapons and resources into Israel.
And those comments were just from the 2nd of February. And Kieran was speaking outside the office of Tim Watts, who's the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, as you heard, calling on those gathered to take more material action to sabotage Australian exports to Israel. Now, alarmingly, you're about to see Victorian Greens MP Gabrielle De Vitry backing up the demands as she addresses the sit-intifada 4 days later.
Please keep turning up. It is not too late for Labor to change their minds. This Labor government has entered into memorandums of understanding with the Israeli Defence Force to provide shame on them, to provide weapons, to provide intelligence, to provide technology to carry out their bloody, violent genocide.
Just another example of the anti-Semitic Greens Party again associating with the most extremist elements of our society. Now, these protesters are among the radical pro-Palestinian activists who occupy the forecourt of Victoria's Parliament day in and day out. As I mentioned, they call themselves sit-intifada, which means an uprising, usually by Muslims, against Israel. Osama bin Laden used the last intifada as justification for the attacks of September 11. Now, the founder and leader of this sit-intifada group is Ihab Al-Azhari. And here's Ihab speaking 2 weeks later in front of a Melbourne factory that this group calls, and I quote, a master of war enabling Israeli genocide.
It's a month of jihad, strength, fighting your own soul, fighting your own desire. We're not afraid from word jihad. Jihad is a great word, the same as Allahu Akbar, a great word, a very great word. We're proud of it. We say it slowly, slowly. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
And then just 4 days later, in front of Melbourne's Town Hall, Ihab and fellow sit-intifada supporters clashed with a group of Jewish Australians who were just calmly trying to walk into Melbourne Town Hall to attend a debate about whether to have a ceasefire. They had tickets for the event. They were calmly walking towards the door, as directed by police, when they were violently assaulted.
We continue to commit this genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza using Australian weapons, as reported by Al Jazeera in November last year.
There is ample amounts of crystal clear video footage where some of this group attacked upstanding Jewish citizens, including Mark and Sharon, who were on my program a couple of weeks ago, along with Yaakov. None of them want their surnames mentioned for obvious reasons, for their personal security. Then that same night, the group was back at it, this time making good on Kieran Stewart Asherton's calls to disrupt supplies to Israel. In this final video, filmed at 3:30 the next morning, the Black People's Union films Israeli cargo vessel, the Zim Sparrow, as it pulls into the port of Melbourne before showing blood pouring over stars of David.
Liebe Palästina, großes Zionismen, liebe, liebe, liebe Palästina, liebe, liebe, liebe Palästina, liebe Palästina, großes Zionismen.
So despite all of these threats and public comments that we've pieced together tonight, Victorian Police told us today police are aware of the sit-intifada and there are no current investigations. No current investigations. Now, police may say, as they did to us today, oh, these protesters haven't committed any offences. Well, that's not quite right. The man whose face we couldn't show you earlier, as I said, is allegedly involved in another criminal matter that's before the courts. But it's understood police hadn't connected him to this group. We've also seen the footage of Mark and Sharon and Yaakov being attacked, and emails obtained by Sky News between Victorian Police Chief Commissioner Shane Patton and Deputy Commissioner Neil Patterson discuss how they're now looking at and investigating the protests outside of Melbourne Town Hall. The Chief Commissioner wrote, "I can assure you that Victoria Police is committed to maintaining the peace in all events we attend in what are often very difficult and volatile circumstances." Well, I have to say, this is an odd way of keeping the peace, arrest the innocent citizens and provide safe passage for the violent thugs. These incidents indicate that their comments about terrorism and their activism isn't simply grandstanding. But police were unaware of the videos threatening terror attacks until we alerted them this afternoon. It's understood Victoria Police now has analysts from the counter-terror unit examining the footage. But given this group has been involved in multiple incidents of disrupting the peace, you'd think that police would have already been investigating and monitoring the members. It's disappointing that they didn't establish the link between a protester and another serious alleged criminal offence. Now, remember, Victorian Police also refused the Israeli ambassador's request to guard a hotel where the family members of hostages were staying, and that even after they were the victims of an extreme protest. The pro-Palestinian protesters in the heart of Melbourne City have been aggressive and violent, and yet police have failed to lift a finger. And instead, the innocent and law-abiding Australians were dragged away and arrested while the protesters just carried on. How can we have any confidence that Victorian police are putting the safety of Australians first? There seems to be this absurd reversal where the violent, aggressive protesters are given free passage while the innocent are falsely blamed and even arrested. All right, let's bring in Sky News host Liz Storer and contributor Joe Hildebrand. Terrific to see both of you.
Lovely to see you, Sharri.
Look, Joe, clearly Victorian police are failing to do anything, but it was the opposite story in New South Wales on the weekend where for the first time we've seen that pro-Palestinian protesters have been arrested after they jumped in front of New South Wales Premier Chris Minns at the Mardi Gras.
Yeah, I think you're seeing, I suppose, two very different types of government in New South Wales and Victoria, both Labor, but one Labor right, the other Labor left. Chris Minns, unlike some of his colleagues, I'm sorry to say, to the left, is not captive to the pro-Palestinian movement. And indeed, when we had a similar situation in Sydney where a Jewish man carrying the Israeli flag was moved on by police and he was taken into custody while, a whole bunch of aggressive protesters ended up barrelling down George Street and screaming, kill the Jews or F the Jews or whatever it was at the Opera House. And the police simply did nothing. That has been a mark of shame for the New South Wales Police, and it's very clear that they've learnt from it and they're not going to let it happen again. In Victoria, what we seem to be, even from the Chief Commissioner's own comments, what we seem to be seeing is a commitment not to justice, not to actually prosecuting people who could be a risk to society and taking them out of the picture. And you and I both know there have been some very serious escalations in this area, but keeping the peace. So what do you do when you keep the peace? Well, you take the path of least resistance. You target the fewer people and you get them out of the way so that the greater number don't have anything to bash, quite frankly, or don't have anything to attack. And so you're basically giving way to mob rule. You're saying, right, if you're more aggressive, if you outnumber the people you don't like, the easiest thing for us to do is to take away your victims and let you run free. And that's exactly what's happened.
And then the problem is it then makes Liz, going into Melbourne CBD, just attending a debate at the town hall, unsafe for Australians, for Jewish Australians. What's your reaction to the footage we just showed of the Victorian protesters saying that they openly call themselves terrorists and that it's ethically justified?
Is there any wonder these guys are now just bald-faced saying it? They've been emboldened by all the hate preachers that they've seen who have not even got a slap on the wrist. There was very little follow-up, and what follow-up there was did not lead to any serious investigation, any penalisation. These guys are going to continue to get bolder and bolder because, as Joe basically just said, if you keep rewarding the aggressor, you're just going to get more aggression. So why wouldn't they become this bold? They're happy to film themselves, they're happy to post it online, hoping to secure more and more followers and people who think like them. You're just going to get more of this until you see some proper policing that is cracking down on people who are themselves now just outright calling themselves terrorists.
I mean, and calling for jihad, and it's also the hate preachers. You know, none of them have had their sermons that incite violence taken down. Apparently, they can't be charged on under any laws, even though the laws are there. And it kind of reminds me of the case, you know, Joe, with what you said before. You said that it's easier to remove the peaceful people rather than deal with the rabid mob. It reminds me of this case, and I've got the Israeli doctor on my show a bit later tonight. You know, medical conference cancelling the registration of an Israeli doctor because instead of just stopping the violent protesters, instead of getting police involved to stop the protesters.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So do you do what is right or do you do what is easy? Now, we know the Holocaust happened because millions of people did what was easy and just looked the other way until the horror was all too apparent. And again, just as, you know, I mean, these stupid activists, I mean, it's so dumb and they're just so clearly deranged and, you know, they like to talk themselves up, you know, oh, we've got to think bigger. You know, they can't even think big enough to get a bus ticket to Canberra and protest outside the actual Foreign Minister's office. But the problem is, as we know...
Don't give them any ideas, Joe.
No, but the problem...
I don't think they're watching.
But they're just so hopelessly disorganised. They're so hopelessly... Extremely extreme, a tiny minority. That's why they're not getting any traction, because there's so few of them and they're right on the sort of fringes of intelligence and politics. But again, we know that just as, you know, they will say things like one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, someone who thinks that they're just an activist or they're a freedom fighter or they're standing up for genocide, once you are that kind of crazed and obsessed about an issue that all other considerations go out the window, then it's a very, very easy and simple step to step into, you know, where does it begin, for example? I'd step into violence, step into throwing an egg at someone,
and that's why the police need to step
assaulting someone on the steps of town hall. And then what happens when someone else decides that they're going to show that they're even more anti-genocide and they sink the boot in?
And that's why police need to step in early, because they're just allowing it to escalate and it becomes even more dangerous. Now, let's have a look at this big announcement from the coalition today regarding their main energy policy. It reportedly involves a plan to identify locations for small modular nuclear reactors. Nationals leader David Littleproud spoke on Sky News this morning. He called on the government to hold an energy summit, but the Prime Minister has already basically smashed Peter Dutton's idea. Here's what Anthony Albanese had to say about it today.
Well, it doesn't add up. I think nuclear power can work overseas and does work. I've got no problem at all.
But what if there was a business model showing it could work? I mean, we've had people like our former Governor Kevin Scarce talking about how much money we could have made from nuclear waste disposal in SA. That's the disposal side. Some people say it could actually work economically.
Well, no one has ever been prepared to put up $1.
Liz, should the PM be ruling this out so early?
Well, maybe if he would lift the moratorium on nuclear energy in this country, there'd be plenty of people willing to put up $1. But right now, why would they bother when there just appears to be absolutely no chance? We need to see a flex in Parliament first, and that's exactly what Dutton is providing here. And that's such a simple brush off, absolutely no details as to why it's not feasible. They keep inferring, Bowen most especially, is that it's too expensive. I'd like to see something show me that it's actually proving would be more expensive than what we're bleeding out of every orifice paying for their subsidies for their renewables and their green dream and zero emissions by 2050 earlier if they can get it. And also they still keep inferring, Sharri, that this is unsafe. As Bowen said just last week, you know, who would want one of these nuclear reactors near your home? I'm happy to live next to one. And to keep pushing that narrative to people that actually this is very unsafe is just downright untrue. Technology has advanced in leaps and bounds since Chernobyl. Hiroshima isn't a thing because we won't be building them on fault lines.
But
however,
it
their arguments against this are so farcical and they can't back them up, which is why they do those silly brush-offs.
Joe, I mean, seeing as we're moving away from coal, it does make sense to diversify and broaden energy sources, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does, or at least look at the options that are out there. Just very quickly, Hiroshima was a large bomb dropped from the US Air Force.
Fukushima.
I know that's what you meant.
Thanks,
but just before the letters start. But yes, I think, look, Albo was right that there have been, inquiries into this, and no one has been able to find a case study as to how it works. And what Bowen is saying is not that it's unsafe, but there are plenty of people who will be saying, we know we live in a NIMBY society at the best of times. There'll be plenty of people saying, yes, I support nuclear power. And then when someone says, all right, well, we're going to have a power plant down the end of your street, they go, oh, look, it's not that I'm opposed to nuclear, but it's just the traffic would be too much. And we've seen that happen with everything from, mosques to high-rise development.
To immigrants in the United States.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So again, he's talking about the politics of it and the difficulties there. And again, I think there'd probably be political problems with the dumping of nuclear waste, where South Australia would say, right, we've got all this desert, nothing to do with it. Pretty soon, I'm sure you'd have objections from Indigenous groups or Get Up or whatever.
Well,
so it's just a thorny issue.
We already have nuclear waste here because obviously hospitals are already using this. So again, that's something that most people aren't aware of enough to know that it's already being taken care of in this country and is perfectly safe and fine. And when have you heard of it?
Yeah, again, I don't have a problem with it, but again, I don't think, from what I can understand, the numbers don't stack up yet, and that is because these small modular reactors, these SMRs that are called, the technology just isn't quite there yet to make it worth the upfront expense. Having said that, we know...
Well, we could argue the same with regard to renewables.
That's right, exactly. And we know with solar, once we just sort of pulled back, all the barriers and said, right, go for your life, suddenly solar panels shot down in price. There was a massive take-up.
At least if we were spending it on nuclear, we'd know that we were getting apples with apples, because we know that coal and nuclear are the same. They've got the base load, etc.
Yep.
Sorry, Sharri.
Well, I just quickly wanted to get to this topic before we run out of time. Big story worldwide today that former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev is claiming that Germany is preparing for war with Russia. It comes after highly confidential British and French army intelligence regarding the Ukraine war was leaked by German officers. Liz, what do we know about this and how embarrassing is this for Berlin?
This is incredibly embarrassing. You literally can't believe this happened. It sounds... So they're on an unsecure video call. These guys literally just phoned in it. They're using their normal mobile phones to have this chat. The German lieutenant has talked about how the British are getting their weaponry into Ukraine. Literally, it's in these kind of tanks. And then he talks about how the French are doing it differently but successfully. He's then talking about how they can get their Taurus missiles, which Germany up to this point has expressed, no, we actually don't really want to send these. We've got some reservations. How can we do it without anybody noticing? So not only have you blown Britain's cover, you've blown France's cover, now you're actively talking about how can we get our missiles in there without the German people knowing. It's just one disaster after another. The more you look into this phone call, which is now a lot of it just chunks of verbatim, freely available on the internet.
The best lesson to all of us, never speak on the regular phone line.
That's right, try WhatsApp. For the love of God.
Signal phone call, WhatsApp.
Oh, China will love that. Use WhatsApp.
Russia's screwed anyway, that's the thing. It's like, sure, they said it, what are you going to do about it? As they say, Russia used to go around saying it had the best army in the world. Turns out it doesn't even have the best army in Ukraine. So if British and French and German forces are planning to do something, it's the Crimean War all over again.
Well, they're already doing it. Another one of his slip-ups was referring to British troops on the ground, which... That's not supposed to be. What's happening right now.
I'm very much a whatever it takes kind of guy.
All right, Liz Storr, Joe Hildebrand, great to see you. We'll talk on the phone. Coming up, our exclusive interview with the ASEAN General Secretary and his concerns about China, plus the Israeli doctor who flew all the way to Australia for a medical conference only to be sent back home. He'll join me live after this ad break. Welcome back. Now, we have to ask, what has happened to Australia's inclusive society? An Australian medical conference invited an Israeli doctor who specialises in emergency trauma to speak here in Australia. He flew here, but then the pro-Palestinian activists kicked in. They bombarded the organisers of the Frontline Mental Health Conference with calls to boycott his presentation. There was even a Change.org petition. And I'm appalled to say the organisers caved in, writing in an email, "Regrettably, we must inform you that we are unable to accommodate your attendance and have consequently cancelled your registration for the Frontline Mental Health Conference. The safety of all participants is our highest priority, and it is with this in mind that we have reached this decision." Now, the conference organisers told me today in a statement that they received a high volume of online abuse and telephone calls from protesters and activists regarding the Israeli doctor's attendance. They say their security expert advised them that based on the volume and nature of the abuse, there wasn't enough time to conduct a thorough risk assessment to ensure the safety of the 280 conference attendees. They said their priority was the safety of all participants, including Dr. Moshe Fahi. And so, as a result of their duty of care, they say, and in the interest of safety only, they say, they cancelled his registration. Now, Dr. Moshe Fahi is highly qualified in acute trauma, emergency mental health intervention, and psychological first aid. So, this is the Australia we now find ourselves living in, where a Jewish specialist who flew all the way here to support our medical conference and present his expertise and knowledge, can't even present his own medical findings and has to fly home because of his religion, because he dares to support and live in a Jewish homeland. And meanwhile, Palestinian writers and activists who espouse anti-Semitic views are welcomed with open arms to writers' festivals. It's deeply upsetting, it's frustrating, and how can we accept that this is the modern Australia? Why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Moshe has just landed back in Israel. He's literally in the car after getting off the plane from the airport, and he joins me now live. Moshe, thank you very much for your time, and I'm so sorry you've been subjected to this kind of hate in our country. Tell us what happened and what's your reaction to being rejected from this conference?
Well, thank you so much for these warm words and support. And I just want to say that not only that I feel, disappointed, but I feel sorry as being a first responder myself. I feel so disappointed for all these hundreds of first responders that I could actually provide some very important information of how to reduce immediately risk for, post-trauma, how to enable them to keep on their very important work through all those times and hours that they are keeping work so hard. And this bunch of people who are extremely radical succeeded not only to kick me out of this conference, but succeeded to increase the high risk for all the participants by just not letting me speak over there. This is really disappointing in behalf of me, but I must say that the minute it happened, I received so many warm words from all the Jewish community, as well as from other professionals, not only Jewish, and I was so happy about that as well.
Did you expect this kind of treatment from Australia? I mean, we're predominantly a Christian nation. We support Jews. We're meant to support Israel. We have traditionally. Did you expect this from us?
No, definitely no. Well, I knew, of course, there might be, questions, and I was prepared for that. And I have prepared not the question, also the answer, but I was not at all prepared for this kind of welcome. No, not at all. I was really surprised. I have so many good friends in Australia, so many people from my profession who I know quite well. I wasn't expecting this kind of welcoming to me.
It's also this attitude of, it's easier to send the Israeli doctor home and to give in to all of those who were behaving incorrectly, who were sending abuse and vile threats. I mean, so dangerous that the safety of the conference couldn't be guaranteed. Why would organisers give in to this sort of aggressive conduct at your expense?
I have no idea. I think that, technically, if something happens, you ask the police to help. That's so easy. And I think they've taken the very, very easiest way to handle the situation, to tell me not to attend the conference and actually to cancel my registration to the hotel and to make sure in any way that I will not be there. And I must say that these people just 1 week ago were speaking so differently, and they were just asking me to be more and more present and to give more lecture. So this is kind of huge shift in their attitude towards me. I have no idea why they chose this option, and not just
Weak, no courage. And Moshe, as you just revealed there, they actually cancelled your hotel booking as well, so that you had no option, you had nowhere to stay. I mean, it might seem like a small thing, but the flight from Israel to Australia is very long. It's not an easy flight, and now you've had to fly here and go straight back home.
Well, yeah, because I thought that I've made all this flight. I did meet some very important people in the Jewish community, but eventually I decided that what's best for me is to go back home. And, I'm also head of a couple of departments I have to take care of. So that was the best option for me. Yeah.
I'm so sorry you've had such a terrible experience. I mean, I'm sure most Australians watching this tonight would be absolutely horrified that this has happened to you. The way those conference organisers have arrived at this decision is shameful. And look, we're just so sorry, Moshe. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Now, the ASEAN Australia Summit is underway in Melbourne, with the Prime Minister hosting 11 Southeast Asian leaders in the hopes of strengthening regional defence and economic ties. This is 50 years since we became ASEAN's first external partner, and this gathering now is the largest of world leaders in Australia in 6 years. Now, ASEAN Secretary-General Dr. Kim Hourn joined me for his only Australian television interview earlier today, and here's that interview now. Secretary-General, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
China's becoming a risky investment option for Western companies. The trade tariffs also making businesses think twice. Would you like to see Australia diversify trade further away from China and towards ASEAN?
You see, ASEAN has always been promoting trade with all of its partners. So we would like very much to increase trade volume between ASEAN and Australia. And I think the current volume of trade between both sides are still, of course, it's a good number, but we'd like to see more increasing substantially in the coming years, if possible.
Will the free trade agreement be the focus of your meetings this week, and what other outcomes are you looking for?
Well, it's not just FTA. This week is we're looking at, on the one hand, is to look at the past 5 decades, but also look into the future, what more we could do to capitalize on the existing relations, partnership and cooperation. Now we have the comprehensive strategic partnership. So what's important is that we have to do more by working together across the different sectors.
Do you think the COVID pandemic and the aggression from China has shown us that it's important for countries like Australia to not overly rely on China and move towards ASEAN?
What has been surprising to me is that the numbers in terms of trade between ASEAN and Australia has been somewhat minimal. We should do a lot more together. I think we are very close neighbors, and we have been working together for the past 50 years, and I think it's important for us to capitalize on the economic opportunity that we have now before us. ASEAN is a growing market. We have 671 million people, ranking third only after China and India, and I think Australia should looking at ASEAN more seriously.
You're highly involved in dealing with Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. ASEAN is taking a lead role in negotiations over these disputes. How are you trying to resolve this?
In the past few years, we've been working together on the negotiation for the Code of Conduct or COC. At the moment, we agree on both sides that we should have the COC ready before the end next year. I think this is a timeline we're looking at. How fast we can go.
The Code of Conduct is very significant, but there's also the question of China abiding by it. Do you think Beijing will?
Well, again, this is something that I cannot say, but what I can say is that once we are parties to this COC, we should have the political commitment and we should have the will to implement the COC. But also, we can also say that the COC is not a panacea for all the problems related to the South China Seas. I hope we're trying to resolve as much as possible, but I think we shouldn't expect that this is a panacea for all the problems.
Indonesia's new president-elect Prabowo Subianto is a military hardliner. How worried are you about this election and how it'll impact on democracy?
In fact, I do not want to go into the what we call domestic politics of the member states. But what I can say is that Indonesia has strong institutions, a lot of experiences, and I believe it's what transpired is the will of the people of Indonesia, and we have full confidence and trust in the leadership in Indonesia.
In terms of regional security, are you worried about Hamas cells emerging in our region?
We are focusing very much on counterterrorism cooperation, and I think including intelligence sharing. So I believe that this is still the core work of ASEAN at the moment. Now, of course, I'm not aware of this at all, but I believe that the law enforcement, but also the intelligence sector, they would be able to know and to work to ensure that the region is free of what we call violence, extremism, and of course, terrorist activities.
The Australian government under the coalition was very vocal about Chinese economic coercion and threats. The current government has taken a different approach. Would you like to see Australia be more vocal on Chinese aggression?
It's up to Australia. For us in ASEAN, we have to stay engaged with all our partners. China is a partner of ASEAN as well. In fact, one of the comprehensive strategic partners of ASEAN. So I think we have to work together. Any differences that we have to engage constructively, openly and transparently. This is how we do in ASEAN. We will continue the what we call the cultural dialogue and have the consultations, and of course the policy engagement.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's the ASEAN Secretary-General there. Now coming up, we break down the Dunley by-election outcome, what party insiders are saying on both sides of the fence, and I'll get the assessment from my political panel. It's a result that no one can be very happy about. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, let's look at the Dunley result now. As you know, the Liberals' primary vote went up around 6.8%. Labor performed better than at the federal election, only a marginal increase in their primary. But the general consensus is that the Liberals were expected to do better during a cost of living crisis. The Nine papers were scathing, with political editor David Crowe writing that the outcome on Saturday was, in a word, average, and Dutton needs to be better than average. Labor held ground on its primary vote. The Liberals made a modest gain, and there was no proof that Dutton has the strategy in the suburbs to clinch the next election. Similar tone from Simon Benson, the political editor in The Australian. He reports that at a time of peak cost of living pressures, hard heads in the party, who are numerate enough to understand what really happened, have conceded to this columnist that this has been a disappointing result for the party. It is a pass mark at best, said one. And Christopher Daw in the Nightly wrote that it's pure lunacy to suggest there is anything remotely positive for the coalition out of Dunkley, other than it wasn't the debacle of the previous by-election in Aston, in which they went backwards. Ray Hadley said Liberals were never expected to win this and it was an impossible task.
They needed more than 6.3, which has never happened with a first-term government, never. So they were out to create history, and history was not created. As I say to you, Charlie, not rocket science, old mate. They were never going to win. It was all about how many they could swing back their way, and they swung from 6.3 back to 3.8. And a first-term government has never lost a by-election in those circumstances. So we don't need to talk to anyone about it. It's just simple stuff.
Now, the swing keeps changing as the result is being counted. At the moment, it's a 3.7% swing away from Labor. Now, as Paul Murray pointed out last night, if that was replicated at a general election, at least 10 Labor MPs could potentially lose their seats. Joining me now, former Chief of Staff to Opposition Leader Bill Shorten and current Director of GXO Strategies, Cameron Milner, and former Press Secretary to Scott Morrison and current Director at Headline Advisory, Andrew Carswell. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Cameron, what's your assessment of this? Was this cause for Albanese to stuff his face with rainbow cake, as Christopher Daw wrote today?
Well, I think the result in Dunkley comes down to one man, and that's Jim Chalmers. Jim Chalmers fought really hard to get stage 3 up against the Prime Minister's wishes, but he got stage 3 up. If not for stage 3, Dunkley would have been lost for Labor. You can draw a Chalmers line through the electorate. The booth below that, which didn't get the stage 3 benefits after the change, they voted Liberal. Everything above the line voted for Chalmers and his tax cut. It's a transactional cost for Labor. I mean, Albanese broke his promise. He lied. So voters will see Albanese as a liar, but Chalmers as a leader.
Well, would you agree with that, Andrew Carswell, that had the stage 3 tax cuts not been changed by Labor, that, you know, this might have been a better result for Peter Dutton?
I certainly believe that, Sharri, and I think this is the reason they chose to bring those those tax cuts forward and in a changed way.
Totally agree.
There was some clear bad polling in the lead up to Christmas that forced their hand. There was a rising level of animosity towards the government in relation to cost of living and the fact that they hadn't gone as far as the public wanted them to go. So they were trembling in the lead up to Christmas. They thought that this seat was vulnerable, despite the fact that this is a very hard seat for the coalition to win back in a state that has become a bit of a wasteland for the Liberal Party. So I think they had to make that move. Albanese will pay a price in the long term for that because of the trust that he broke here. But it comes back to this point too, though. They haven't gone far enough yet. I mean, this is just a milkshake and a sandwich. It won't even touch the sides. So the anger will continue to grow, and that's why I look at the result at the weekend as, yes, it's a pass mark for Peter Dutton, but it gives him a platform to build off because the anger is going to get worse and worse. Currently, they're not blaming the government for cost of living crisis. They're not there yet. But they will be in a couple of months' time.
Well, you know, we've been dealing with this cost of living crisis and you know, as we've reported on the show, some Australians are struggling to even feed their families, to clothe their children. Cameron, why do you think Australians don't, according to this result anyway, aren't blaming the Prime Minister for this? And not to mention only cost of living, but the immigration scandal, the border security, the criminal detainees who've been released on the streets. How is none of this coming home to the government?
Well, I think it has, and so the result was a reasonable size swing in a by-election against a first-term government. So let's put that to one side. But Labor was saved by what Jim Chalmers did around the tax cuts. He fought hard for it because, as you said, Andrew, in December, with Giles on immigration and everything else, Labor was out on the mat in Dunkley. But bringing stage 3 forward, making it a tax cut for all the way Jim Chalmers did, saved Dunkley and has put Labor back in the game there. But you're right. I mean, there's a slow burn on cost of living. Giles has still got problems with immigration, and we've still got a long way to go before the general election.
Andrew, you've written a column on Dunkley in The Nightly. You're a new columnist for The Nightly. You say a majority of Liberals' increase in primary vote seems to have come from, you know, the two parties that didn't run, One Nation and the Palmer United. But you also suggest that maybe Peter Dutton could have gone harder on the economy.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a reluctance to talk about the economy in any real fulsome way in the lead up to this by-election. And firstly, they were obsessed with boats and borders, and that is Peter Dutton's natural strength. That's where he has an ascendancy over the government. But the issue wasn't resonating in the seat as much as cost of living. Cost of living was number one. Immigration and border security was number 7, and a distant 7. So they were talking about an issue that was important, yes. The government has made an absolute balls up with immigration and border security. But it's not the issue that is concerning constituents in Dunley. It is cost of living. So they were a little bit distracted by that, but there was a reluctance to talk about it because they feared that talking about the economy or talking about cost of living in any fulsome way would remind the punters of Albanese's tax cuts. So they were loath to go there to their detriment.
Yeah. All right, look, apologies. We have a shorter panel than usual tonight, but we'll see you both next Monday. Andrew Carswell, Cameron Milner, thank you both very much. Now, after the break, we're going to look at this embarrassing payout the ACT's had to make to former Liberal Minister Linda Reynolds and also paying the costs of former prosecutor Shane Drumgold. We'll get the take from legal expert Chris Merritt. Well, joining me now to discuss the major news with Shane Drumgold and Linda Reynolds is the Australian's legal affairs contributor Chris Merritt. Chris, thanks for your time tonight. Look, give us the update of these findings today.
Well, the big story is Shane Drumgold's supposed victory in the ACT Supreme Court. But if this is a victory, I'd hate to see a loss. Mr. Drumgold tried to knock down all of the findings of the Sofronoff report, which made terrible assessments about his conduct, and he failed on 90% of what he was after. He failed. He did get up an argument. The court agreed that there was a perception of bias affecting much of Mr. Sofronoff's report, but let's get real. This is not reality. This is not a reality test of bias. This is perception. When you look at the substance, Sofronoff lost a little bit of bark, but the substance of his report remains intact. The adverse findings against Mr. Drumgold have not been challenged. 90% of them are still in place.
Linda Reynolds also had a win. The state is going to have to cough up $90,000. Also apologise to her for comments that Shane Drumgold made.
Yes, and for that, the ACT government can thank Mr. Drumgold. This all came to light because of interesting interaction between Mr. Drumgold and a reporter from The Guardian. Mr. Drumgold let it slip, we think, that he'd sent a letter to the police, the ACT police, containing some statements about Ms. Reynolds. That letter was obtained unredacted on FOI, Freedom of Information. It was not privileged, hence a $90,000 payout. So some of the money that will come Mr. Drumgold's way or the government's way will go out to Ms. Reynolds.
All right, Chris Merritt, you've been following this case closely. We're going to have more findings with next month or in April. We're going to get the outcome of Justice Michael Lee and the Bruce Lohman defamation, so a lot more to come on this. Thank you for your time. And that's it for me today. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And right now, here's Paul Murray.